Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends at Gourmand. They offer gut-friendly and filler-free products to make cooking at home with gut issues more tasty. They currently offer broths and spices that are certified low FODMAP so that you can have more flavor in your kitchen. Check them out at gourmandfoods.com and save 15% with my code Erin Judge. Welcome back to The Gut Show. I'm your host, Erin Judge, and I'm so excited for today's episode because we have my team dietitian here at Innovate, Lindsey Davis. Lindsey is a registered dietitian, and she has been with Innovate for the past year. As part of our practice, she works one-to-one with clients who are dealing with IBS, motility disorders like gastroparesis, and even GERD. And she also specializes in disordered eating and eating disorders. So she helps a lot of our patients who are struggling with that overlap of eating disorders and IBS, as well as like SIBO and things like that. In this conversation, Lindsey and I are talking about motherhood and IBS. So like myself, Lindsey also has struggled with IBS as part of her own journey. And that's what led her to her work that she does today. But she also has a unique experience with IBS that I have not experienced, and that is pregnancy and motherhood. And so she's talking about some of just the real conversations around what happens when you're pregnant, what happens when you deliver, and even what things look like in terms of managing your own health as you are a mother or being a parent. So anyone who is thinking about potentially having a child one day, or even struggling with just demands that maybe come from their career or other responsibilities, or any parent that is going to be involved in raising children and taking care of kids, as well as managing their own symptoms, this conversation will be great for you. So enjoy the conversation and then connect with us after at the Gut community if you have any questions or thoughts that you want to share. Hey, Lindsey. So excited that you're here. If you guys are not familiar with Lindsey, she is one of the team dietitians at Innovate on my team, and she's been with us for over a year as our recording. And so excited to have you on the podcast officially and finally in front of our community.
I know. I'm so happy to be here. So been here a little bit over a year, and I'm so excited to get to talk to our gut community that follows us so regularly. And just excited to have a chance to talk today.
Yeah, absolutely. And so those of you who do follow along on Instagram, Lindsey is seen over on our Innovate Instagram page more frequently. But we don't hear a lot about Lindsey's actual story. So we're going to dig deeper into that today and talk a little bit about like being a dietitian in this space, and just an open conversation about that if you guys are not familiar with that. So as we get started, Lindsey, share a little bit about how you became a dietitian and why you gained an interest in the GI space, and what led you to your position now.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just start at the very beginning, but just to give you a whole picture of how it all came together. But excuse me, the change in weather has made my voice a little bit hoarse as the weather in Nashville can't decide what it's going to do, if it's going to be cold or hot. So, but I was actually diagnosed with IBS-D when I was 12. They did originally think I had Crohn's disease. But through the gamut of tests that are run, obviously everything came back quote unquote normal. So was just given the diagnosis of IBS-D. But in that time, I developed a lot of fear around food. So if you can imagine like being 12 and going to slumber parties and, play dates and all the things, but having episodes of diarrhea. And so I really, really began to restrict food. And I kind of came to about 5 to 7, what I would call my safe foods that I would eat that wouldn't cause an episode is kind of what I called it. And that, it was a protective measure that I did for myself because I was given not very much information once given the diagnosis of IBS-D and how to manage it. It was just sort of like, this is what you have. Okay, good luck. And so that restriction and fear of food morphed into an eating disorder. And it was very much anorexia. And I had that for 9 years. Towards, in more high school, it did sort of morph into a binge and purge type thing because I just got hungry. And but still had that disordered view of food and fear of food in itself. So I actually ended up going to a residential treatment facility for eating disorders, and it changed my life. And part of that transformation was working with the dietitian there, and which really created this freedom for me in terms of not viewing food as the enemy. And so I left that facility saying, I'm going to become a dietitian. I'm going to be that source of light and hope for other people. And so that was kind of my morph into the field. And then, I didn't necessarily get to work with that population for a while, but then came to Innovate, and both of my just wonderful worlds collided. And now I get to work with both, actually the exact population that I wanted to. So, but also side note, my IBS has now morphed into, I keep saying morph, but my IBS has changed to IBS-C now. Since becoming a mother, it has changed to very, very severe IBS-C. So lots of things, lots of layers. But that's my story.
That's awesome. And the change and morph, I guess, that happens, I think, to a lot of people. And it's always this confusing piece, especially when you've been diagnosed as a child, like hormones and change and just, it's so fascinating. And I think we still have so much to learn about why that even happens, because it doesn't always make sense. And so it is interesting that you've experienced that, because I know a lot of people have. And if you guys don't know, Lindsey is our dietitian that does see our eating disorder clients here at Innovate. And so those with histories of eating disorder, current eating disorders, or even just more significant disordered eating and needing a bit more support in that area, which is fine and okay and normal to need that, because there's a lot of, again, layers to IBS and how that can impact your relationship with food. And we've talked about it throughout the season on the podcast, but Lindsey has a special interest in that. So it helps a lot of clients with that, which is so special and important. So let's talk about motherhood and that piece. So someone who lives with IBS, like, yes, a lot of us become dietitians because of our personal story, and, there's empathy with that, and it's so special and important. But you have a unique viewpoint on your life with IBS that I don't have as someone who's not a mother. And so tell me more about that. Like, what happened whenever you were maybe preparing to have kids, or just kind of where did that begin? And what was that like, having IBS kind of on your mind and like in your body, if you will?
Yeah, it is. It's a part of you. So, I think just having the awareness beforehand and knowing, it was pretty much IBS-C. It had made its transition before, but it just kind of got worse after. But, just having that awareness and knowing, okay, this is probably going to be affected by pregnancy. The awareness that when you are pregnant, constipation is common because you have a human being that is sitting amongst your organs, and it's moving things around. And, so just knowing that and being able to communicate ahead of time with my doctors of like, okay, this is something I struggle with, and navigating different, supplements. Like I did become anemic. So needing to take iron, but also knowing that iron can have a constipating effect. And so just communicating openly and being okay with bringing in those extra tools. Like at Innovate, we really talk about, we help clients figure out their baseline toolkit for IBS. And then also like our additional toolkit for when the baselines are not cutting it. And in pregnancy, and in motherhood, sometimes the baseline, it won't cut it for a season, for a time, And so being okay with bringing in added tools or added support, and knowing what those added tools are, is really helpful. So a lot of grace and a lot of self-compassion is needed. And because when you don't have kids, and I don't want to be one of those people that's like, I don't know, if you don't have kids, like you have all the time in the world to do, what you need to do, when you need to do it. We are all stressed. The world has so much pressure on every single one of us. So that's not what I'm not coming from that perspective at all. But there is a sense of not having tiny people depend on you for every one of their needs. And you have a little bit of more autonomy in how your schedule is dictated, and actually how money is spent, or how, things like that. And you may have more freedom in your budget. And so navigating those changes when kids come requires a lot of self-compassion, because you put forth a lot of effort to take care of yourself, but inevitably curveballs are going to be thrown at you. And giving yourself grace in those moments is so important, and not letting it push you into a screw it mentality.
Yeah. That's a hard one. I think even without IBS, right, we see that happen with a lot of mothers. Like, we'll come out and speak about that, of how they, not necessarily, I don't like that phrase of like, let yourself go, but I think let go of the things that serve yourself, or like self-care, kind of goes out the window. And I think that balance is such a tricky part, where everyone finds it differently or doesn't find it at all. And I think it just depends on, supports in your life, resources, personalities, maybe even, or the child, the human being itself, who might be one way or another. Like, there's so many pieces to that I think set up really interesting expectations of moms specifically. I want to talk about something in pregnancy first, before we get into like having a baby and that part. There's a lot to that too. But one question that I've heard people kind of bring this up, like with talking to clients, and I'd love your perspective, is body dysmorphia. So you come from not only IBS, which comes with body dysmorphia, right? One day you're bloated, one day you're not. You're having diarrhea. You're severely constipated, like your body's not working like it's supposed to. And, no matter what that presents as, I think we all have that form of dysmorphia, which is where we feel different in our bodies and it looks different. Like, there's this feeling of we're not at home, or like our bodies aren't what they're supposed to be. And so there's that feeling of like, my pants don't fit, but yesterday they did fit. And like, why do they not fit? Or like, I'm looking at myself in the mirror and like, I look okay, but I feel terrible. Or, it's like, that's that dysmorphia. How did that impact you during pregnancy? Because I've always been interested in that. You hear, I think, as someone who's not been pregnant before, sometimes I hear people talk about pregnancy as this like glorious thing of like, showing off their belly and being so excited. And I think about it from an IBS perspective, where it's like, well, I've looked 6 months pregnant before, and like, I was not very excited to just show that off, or like, it doesn't feel very comfortable. Like, how did that impact you? Or like, was it even a thought? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying I've had 2 children, and neither time was I the woman that was like, I feel my most beautiful when I am pregnant. Oh, I just glow and I just feel, no, it was not that way for me. It was very sick, and had a lot of symptoms. But the body dysmorphia piece, again, it definitely shows up. 100% it shows up. And I go back to, if you've got IBS and that is sort of something that you struggle with, or it is a part of you in some way, knowing that on the forefront and communicating that with other people, the people around you, your support system, communicating that with them and saying, I'm about to go on this journey where my body's going to change a lot. And so I'm probably going to have times that I struggle, and I'm going to need you in those moments to help speak truth to me, help me navigate that dysmorphia, help me navigate the thoughts I'm having, and be a sort of landing point, a foundation that I can come back to. So for me, that was my husband, but it can also be a mom, a sister, a friend. But communicating before and having that support system ready for when it inevitably comes up, because it won't be as scary if you're like, okay, here it is. But I'm not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's true of like really anything with IBS, right? It's like trying to pretend like something's not there, like hide it or cover it up. Like, it doesn't work. And we've all been there where we're like, oh, I'm fine. I'm completely fine. I think there's a difference between like positive thinking and mantras, which we use at Innovate. We love it, right? We love positive affirmations because we know the power of the mind and like belief and all of that is so important. But there's a very big difference between like an affirmation and a mantra and a changing your beliefs, but also trying to ignore and become naive, because you can't just say, my gut's going to be completely fine no matter what I do. And like, it's going to be perfect. And you have no support systems in place, then all of a sudden it falls apart. And then you're just disappointed and frustrated and more angry. And so that's an interesting point that would also translate to pregnancy.
And one other thing I'll say, or two quick ones. One, so therapy is a big part of my self-care. If it is a part of your self-care, have your therapist, on board beforehand. If it's not, maybe become established with one before, so that you've developed a rapport. And then when it comes up, you have that person to talk about it with. And then two, the body dysmorphia piece with IBS, it's a little bit different, or it was for me personally, because when you're pregnant, there is a tiny human in there that you do love. And so although your body's changing, it's not, or you feel bloated, it's not just gas, right? It's not just air or poop. There's a human in there. So there's this, I was able to sort of ride the wave of dysmorphia a little bit better, because I knew like this child that I want to have is in there growing.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever get mad at the child that was in you, but also causing you constipation?
For sure. And I want to say this loud and clear. Not enjoying pregnancy and loving that child that is in you can coexist.
Yeah.
You can not enjoy what is happening in your body. You cannot enjoy it and love that child at the exact same time. So there were many times I was like, okay, well, think about my first child with like, so glad you're growing and healthy, but like, I would love to go to the bathroom today. Okay. Like, please, could you scoot over? Could we do something so I can go?
That's really funny. I can't imagine that. You already feel that way with just like your body. I feel like there's so much hyper awareness with IBS, which is where that tricky line of even eating disorders comes into play, is that hyper awareness can be a positive, where you're aware of what your body's saying, you're taking care of your body, you're like, really in tune with it. I call it kind of my grateful side of like, it's talking to be present, be mindful, make choices that really work for me with energy and just how I feel and overall health. Like it's a good thing. But then there's also that fine line between that awareness also creates some, disruption. Yeah. And you become obsessive about it. And I think that's interesting. Pregnancy, I think probably does the same thing, where your body is changing. There's a lot happening, which probably for some people creates this new awareness that was never there. Especially going to the bathroom. We see it in our practice where a lot of those who've gone through pregnancy, then their symptoms come up and then it comes up after. And so it's this new thing where not only is your body changed, not only did you deliver a human being, so then your entire life has changed, but now like hormones and like function of your body is changing. What did that look like for you? So like delivery and on, not even getting into like life disruption and change and adjustment, but even just with your body, like what changed and what did you notice?
Well, depends on how graphic you want me to get. But I'll speak to, how the physical body changes when you push a human out with shoulder blades and hips and a head, and you push it out, the likelihood that something perforates is pretty common. So what I'm saying is hemorrhoids after birth are common. I have them. And with IBS-C, that then creates an additional barrier to deal with. So physically, my body changed in that sense. And I know that is graphic, but we talk about poop all day. This is where we're at.
We need to talk about it, because then I even hear like some people will be told to take, a laxative or a stool softener right to the hospital with them. And if you've never experienced constipation, you may think like, well, why? Why is it a big deal? Like, does it matter? But it's like, no, we need to talk about what's actually happening and like what could happen. And like, this is something that's going to make your body feel so much better versus like you literally not being able to like push poop out of your body because something bad can happen because all of those muscles are completely destroyed, right? For a minute, they need to repair. And so it is important to talk about it because people don't know what they're getting into. And I think that unknown is what makes things so scary. And those with IBS, like I've heard from so many women, like, I don't want to have a baby. Like I'm terrified of getting pregnant. Like, we see it in practice. People will come to us like, okay, this year I want to get pregnant, but I have to figure out all these things because they're so afraid of like what's going to happen because you hear horror stories, but you don't hear like, no, this is what is normal. This can happen, like prepare for it, So it is important to talk about. And how did you prepare for that? Like, did you know that going into your first pregnancy that was going to happen? Or was it more of a, oh, okay, here we go. And then second pregnancy, you were ready?
Yes. Second pregnancy, I was good to go. First pregnancy, I was not. But I navigated it. It was okay. But you're right. So when you push the baby out, it is I call it your downstairs. Your downstairs has to heal. Okay. And so it is very normal and very common for women to need to take a stool softener in the days and possibly weeks after. Because even though you didn't push it out of that downstairs, it's all real close and it's affected. So, that was a little tricky for me to navigate in that my eating disorder did involve the use of laxatives. And so I've, ever since, I've been in recovery for 13 years now, but I'm so like, I'm not going to take, this type or whatever. And so, and the type I think we all recommend clients stay away from are stimulant laxatives. But the hospital.
Why? I think people listening may not understand that or like, what is laxative abuse and like, how can that overlap with an eating disorder? Because a lot of people may feel like, we see it more as eating disorders then contributing to laxative abuse and then the laxative abuse contributing to GI. But I'm guessing it can also work in reverse, just like your food can, where you are, reliant on these stimulant laxatives. And then that could actually contribute to an eating disorder, even because it might spark those thoughts of like cleaning out or clearing out, So hit on that a little bit of why that makes a difference or what
the stimulant itself.
Yeah. Like why is that a connection?
Yeah. So, I think I briefly mentioned it, but my eating disorder did kind of turn into a bulimia of sorts, with the use of laxatives, as my way of purging versus throwing up. I was never able to do that. And the use of stimulant laxatives, a stimulant laxative, their mechanism of action stimulates your peristalsis to increase, and it then really initiates diarrhea. And it does, if taken, if you don't follow the directions on the box, if you take it in excess, it does lead to a cleaning out. If used over time, your gut that peristalsis does become dependent on that stimulant medication. So, it will then not contract, without you taking that medication. And I, thank goodness did not get to the point where my, intestines became fully dependent on it. Through recovery, I was able to regain my, it works on its own. It does take a lot of intention, but it does work on its own. But there are people who do become fully dependent and then have to have a colostomy bag or something like that. And that's really, really intense, but that's sort of how I used it. And why we don't recommend people that come to us take them. But the good news is that the hospital, if you go have a baby, they're not going to recommend you take a stimulant laxative. They're going to recommend you take a stool softener. And that worked just fine. So I just kept boundaries around it. I told my husband, hey, I am going to take this. I need it so I can go. But these are the boundaries I'm setting around it. Just be a second person to keep me accountable. Although I knew I would keep myself accountable, but it's just always good to communicate it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. With everything, it's good to communicate if you've got that support. And if you don't, finding it or paying for hiring a therapist to be that. I mean, that's what people are there for. And so making sure that no matter what, you have that. And if you're tiptoeing on that line where you're like, oh, I might be, we call it abuse of like overusing, but even I think using those more than like once a week, like that can quickly get into that line, whether it's you're intentionally doing that or not. And so that's where you definitely want to reach out to specialists like Lindsey and even like talking to your doctor, like just having those conversations to not go down that route, because it is something that's going to be present. Like you have to kind of keep boundaries around that you may not want to have to do for the rest of your life. And it's just important to keep that function of the gut as functioning and healthy as possible. Okay. So stool softener phase, hemorrhoids, all the fun stuff.
The glory.
Your second delivery, did you do anything different to prepare for that? So maybe someone listening that maybe is pregnant or planning to have a child and they're like, oh no, that is new news to me. Like, what do I actually do about it? Did you learn anything different?
More so it was, I don't want to just keep repeating, but it was just comforting to not have that curveball thrown at me. So the awareness piece, and then knowing, okay, I'm going to need these stool softeners. I did bring some with me to the hospital. I did have them at home. Because you know that the first time you come home with your baby, one, you're exhausted, and two, then you're like, oh God, I have to go to CVS. Like I need to go to CVS and get it. No, that we're not going to do that. Like I had everything at home ready for me. So that transition was a lot smoother and a lot less stress inducing. So just, I would recommend if you have a stool softener that you like, bring it in your hospital bag and then have some ready at home. So you don't have to, I know your husband or whoever could go out and get it for you, but it's just one less thing you have to do when you get home.
Yeah. Absolutely. The toolkit. It's like everything else, like the toolkit, have your toolkit ready.
Just go back to the toolkit.
Yeah. Have your toolkits, travel with them, keep them with you. You never know when you need them. And just the peace of mind that they're there is always so helpful. Okay. So let's get into like the life side of things. So that's a lot of more the physical actual changes. And there's more to that, right? Hormones change. There's no way to know in pregnancy or even after delivery how your body's going to change. Like, yes, we see constipation more frequently during pregnancy. For some, it's like a welcome symptom they love. For some, it's not fun at all. Like some, they don't even experience it. So you never know. And then after delivery, some people, their hormones just kind of balance back out and it's back to normal. For some, it's completely different and their life changes. And that's something that I think we need to continue talking about, but it's not something that we can always expect. So you kind of have to keep that self-compassion and awareness going to see what happens. And then practice taking care of your body along the way, which is going to shift. But when we're talking about a human being, so routines and things, we talk about this a lot through our programs and through social media. It's like, we know that the perfect scenario for IBS is getting adequate sleep, moving your body consistently, stress management. So like allowing your brain to kind of, release, allowing your nervous system to be more on that kind of parasympathetic rest and digest side. Like we know all of that is very important. Consistent meals. Whenever you have a human being, there's some other levels of this too. Like maybe, your life is disrupted or changing and something else is controlling your schedule. What did that look for you as a before and after? And like, what did you learn through both of those experiences with both of your kids?
I'm going to say this because I'll forget if I don't. You were saying, to the listeners who have not, maybe have not been pregnant yet, they haven't reached that point. They're what could they do to prepare? Learn or hone or strengthen your self-compassion skill prior to it. For me, it was more of something I'm doing now. I'm like, oh, I really, really stink at self-compassion, which in itself is like not a compassionate statement, you know? But I'm trying to navigate that now. And my kids are 5 and 3. So I would really start strengthening that skill before. But in terms of like just the life, when we think immediately postpartum and those foundations, you know, that we talk about, that really, really matter to IBS, sleep is going to be disrupted. And I'm not talking disrupted in like, you're going to get up a couple times to pee. Like you're going to probably get up for hours at a time, to feed your little baby. And that baby may be on, sometimes they have their days and nights mixed up. So they might sleep all day and then at night they are just ready to go. And so you have to, you know, work with that. And so your sleep's going to be just wildly disrupted. That in itself is going to stress you out because you then, you know, they send you home with this baby and they're like, okay, keep him or her alive. You have no training, ready to go. And that baby cries and does things and you just, you know, so your stress is going to be higher. Meals, I think the hardest thing meal-wise is your hunger and fullness cues are off. Because your sleep is off, everything is off. And so what I educate clients on is to, one, accept the things that you can't change in this moment. Would it be awesome if you could get adequate sleep that is from the hours of like 10 to 6? Yes, but that's not going to happen right now. It's just not. And it will, but you exerting effort to change that is going to be wasted energy. So there are some aspects that you can't change, some of those foundations, but there are some that you do have influence over. Meal schedule, meal timing, you do have the ability to change that. Stress management, you do have the ability to engage with that and help. Water intake, you can focus on that. Movement, probably not so much in those first few weeks, 3 to 6 months, absolutely. But don't put pressure on yourself to get all those foundations back in place. Accept those that you can't change and then focus on the ones you can.
Cooking on the low FODMAP diet can be a bit bland, especially without garlic and onion. Gourmand is changing the game for those with food intolerances by offering unique flavor substitutes that are more gut friendly, including green onion powder, garlic skate powder, and garlic chive powder. Their products have no additives, no natural flavors, or no preservatives, so that you can bring gourmet taste with ingredients that you trust to your kitchen. You can try them out today at gourmandfoods.com and save 15% off your order with code AaronJudge. Yeah, absolutely. And use your supports along the way. And those, sleep is so important. And we bring that up because we typically start there, right? That's the foundation because your sleep impacts your hormones, which impacts your cues, which impacts your digestive function. And if you're not sleeping enough and like getting good quality sleep, like your gut's not going to work like it's meant to. Like, it just happens like that. And so going back to the awareness of like knowing that can be helpful because that's like, okay, I do need these extra supports. It doesn't mean that we're stuck here forever. It doesn't mean that, my body's broken or, something has completely changed. It's just, okay, right now I need extra support that I maybe didn't need before. Maybe, you're probably not, I guess you can drink coffee. Yeah. Like I said, I was like, I'm trying to remember like postpartum nutrition. I probably would too.
Especially with the second one. I was like, something's got to need some caffeine.
Yeah. So you just do what you got to do, but there's those pressures. So that's something too, I think that is important is that being a human being right now, there's pressures and those pressures contribute to IBS. We see it, right? Mm-hmm. Typically our clientele and those who are living with IBS are in like high pressure jobs, parents to kids to they're trying to do everything that they can, typically, working full time, taking care of children full time, and their house and their own life. And it's just all of these things. And we just see all this pressure of like, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. We've got to do all these things. And then we see it with even IBS care, where you get people who are just like, you got to check it off. And it's like that pressure creates all of this extra stress. And then for mothers, there's even more pressure, right? Of like getting your body back. Like that's a huge one, which is unnecessary. Or even, sleep schedules. And I'm sure there's even more to it that I've never experienced, but you hear about it. And I think that you hear about it because it's so true of like, you've got to do this a certain way. You've got to breastfeed, for this amount of time. And you've got to like gain this weight, hit these markers. And every visit, you have to kind of have all of these different milestones, and the baby's got to eat at a certain time, and, all these things.
And it's all, for some reason, we all tie it back to our worth. If we don't meet these things, then we inherently as human beings are worthless.
Yeah.
And I love that you brought it up, because something that did change for me between baby one and baby two is, after my first child, you do hear some people will be like, sleep when the baby sleeps. If the baby sleeps in the middle of the day, you sleep during the middle of the day. I did not do that, because I was like, well, my house is a mess. I'm home, I'm on maternity leave. So I should be doing these things. So I did not rest. I did not let myself rest. And with baby two, I 100%, every time that kid was asleep, I was asleep. It could be all day. So I rested more. I allowed myself to let go of some of that pressure. Because I saw that it just is not productive in any way, shape, or form to hold on to. It's not, I think I use this phrase with our clients, we're not robots. We can't turn our on switch on and just go. We are humans that have limitations. And realizing those limitations, accepting them, embracing them, honoring them, is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. But the hardest thing to do.
So hard. That's why I didn't do it the first time.
Let go of anyone's expectations. And then even in that, it's like, oh, well, then I need to let, then we take on the expectation. And like, well, then I need to let it go.
To let go of the expectations. Yeah.
How did that shift impact your gut? Did you notice any change with your IBS? I'm just curious, because I think I see it in clients who do let go of some of the pressure, and it's like they're pooping better, or they just feel more relaxed, and like relaxation. Like we talked about with like running, training right now for a run, and a relaxed runner is a better runner. So you think like, okay, I need to hold tight and like run, but it's like the more relaxed and like carefree you are, the better you run. And it's almost that same way with like life, right? The more relaxed you are, the better you function. Did you happen to notice that, or was it just kind of chaos no matter what?
No, I mean, it is chaos, but a good chaos. I don't specifically remember, like my bowel movement schedule being better, but I do remember, very tangibly, that I was more present with baby number, like in that postpartum and experience. And I was more, what you're saying, relaxed. And I don't remember the added pressure or stress of my body not necessarily working with me. Does that make sense? I remember it being more fluid, and me and my body were not at odds, and I was not fighting it, and it wasn't fighting me back. It was more of like, we've embraced each other for where we are. Sounds weird, but it was just, and so I would assume there's a lot of brain fog that comes with the postpartum. But I would imagine that my bowel movements were better because I was in a more relaxed mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were giving your body what your body needs. I think sometimes we can override our body's needs. And especially in postpartum, I think it's even more significant, because not only are your needs higher because you aren't getting enough sleep? And, there's that side of it where it's like, okay, I'm learning things. So like your brain's tired. You're also physically tired, but you also just had a human being. You grew and had a human being. And we overlook it so often. Like that is a significant event that the body goes through. Like significant. I think they compare it what's like running a marathon or something of like the amount of like,
mountain climbing.
Yeah, exerted. It's like so intense. And then you have tissue, not necessarily damaged, but it is kind of damaged. Like your tissues need to repair. All the muscles of the pelvic floor, they can only do so much. Like they stretch out, they have to come back together and repaired. Like, your organs have been
I see a pelvic floor physical therapist now. It's kind of part of the journey.
Yeah, you have to, right? It's like getting like abdominal muscles to come back together and re-coordinate. And like, there's so much that has to happen, like, because their body changes so much. Like, we can't expect the body to just like go back to what it was supposed to do. And a lot of times it'll overcompensate if we do that. And that's like you have to see a pelvic floor physical therapist forever. And so it's just so interesting when you give your body what it needs, which may not always look like what you think. You may think it's like, oh, well, my body needs exercise, and I see this with IBS where it's like, oh, my body needs to like work out every day so that I can, feel slim or look good. Right. And it's like, we have that thought, but it's like, what your body really needs is sleep. Like what your body actually needs is not working out right now. What your body
working out
is like recovery and breath. Like sometimes we think our body needs like, to check the boxes, but it's like your body actually needs you to just slow down.
Stop checking the boxes for a minute.
Yeah. Or like work hard when you feel good because of that fear of feeling bad. It's like, well, if you overwork yourself, then you're going to feel bad. So there's like all these things that just are so counterintuitive to what we think. And then I can only imagine that in motherhood, that's even more, because it's not just the me and myself and my body and like my health, but it's also my family, and like it's all these other buckets that are now added on that you have to do, and you don't get more to go into the buckets. You still have the same amount to go in.
Your bucket's going to empty a lot faster, and that's a limitation in itself you have to accept, because especially in those early months, they do depend on you for every single need that they have. I mean, they can breathe on their own, but you got to change their diaper, to feed them, to give them, they get liquid, and whether you choose to formula feed or breastfeed, which I've done both. First child, I chose to breastfeed. Second child, I chose formula feeding because that was a boundary I decided to set. I was like, if I formula feed or my husband can take more part in the feeding process, and it will then give me a break and I can take care of myself better. So finding those boundaries and being like, how can I care for myself and also take care of my child at the same time?
Yeah. And there's no wrong way to do it.
There's no wrong way. There's no wrong way.
Most people who say there is a wrong way are people who've not gone through it.
Yes. Yeah. They probably don't have.
There's no shame in that. You don't know what you don't know. But at the same time, I think that's been stripped down a lot of like motherhood looks different. And I think it does come back to resources too. It's like, some of what you're saying is a little bit of a luxury that you have someone that's there to support you. Like some people don't have that. And that means you have more buckets and less help filling those buckets. So like, you might not be able to sleep when your baby sleeps. Like you may have to work, right away, or like you may have to do something that most people don't have to do. And like, everyone's situation looks different. And something we talk about with our group program specifically, because people are coming together with their IBS, is you cannot compare to other people with your health. You can't compare to other people with your life. You might be in the exact same situation on paper, but it's going to look so different based on support. Like even when you were mentioning, having people who, okay, you're my landing place, and people don't have that. And what you can't do is just compare yourself to Lindsey and say, oh, well, then that's not possible for me. Instead, okay, well, what does that look like? Which goes back to what you said of what can I not control? And like maybe what is in my control? And it might be just one small thing. But focusing on that still helps release some of that pressure. Or finding those supports, if that's through therapy or other resources, social work, anyone that can be there for you, which is so important. Because taking it on yourself is not going to do any good. So motherhood later, let's talk about what that looks like. you're past the initial stages, finding a little bit of like rhythm, I guess, with your life, maybe having daycare and your kids, going to school now. And like, there's things that are coming up. And I think there's a lot of this, and I've seen it play out because we work with a lot of mothers, specifically just parents. But there's this idea, I think, when people are going into having a child where they think like, this is temporary, then like, I'll get my life back or things will go back.
Yes.
They don't know it. It doesn't always go back to normal. I think it's so interesting how people get themselves in situations where it's like, well, that self-care never came back or like it never adapted. And so talk about that of like adaptation, maybe differences between 1 and 2, being someone who lives with IBS, what has that looked like? And what are some things that you've learned?
Adaptation, and again, another skill that is something that is strengthened in motherhood. You're right in that there is this expectation of, yes, postpartum things are going to look crazy, but then it's going to be smooth sailing. And although it does get easier physically, because they are able to meet some of those needs, like I make their meals, but they can feed themselves. They're potty trained now, they can do that. So some of that physical need is taken off your plate. But there are constantly curveballs being thrown to you, especially if you're a mother that's lived through the pandemic. Let's just all raise our hands. Well, to everyone who's lived through the pandemic, everyone, but so many curveballs with kids being at home learning, and now we're working remote, and how do you do both? And so the biggest thing I learned from one, I'll be very, very honest. Self-care, taking care of myself in any way, shape, or form, I did not do with one. I mean, that baby came out and I was like, you are my world. I sacrifice myself for your good. And I dismiss every single one of my needs for you, which is I want to love people, and I do have that sort of bend. But with kid 2, I saw how damaging that was to me and how I ended up just in the ground, physically and emotionally dead. And so learning in each stage, how can I care for myself? It's not going to look like the ideal picture. We've got our ideal picture ready, and that may come when they graduate from college, or from high school and go to college. We might get there eventually, but for about 18 years, we have to find those pockets of self-care, and be okay with that changing in each season. So I kind of have, my wheelhouse of 5 to 7 things that I know are really, really beneficial for my IBS management and my mental health. Those kind of coincide, or they absolutely coincide. And in each phase, I'm likely not able to do all of them, but which ones can I do? And I engage in those. If it's 2 or 3, I engage in those 3 regularly. And then the next phase comes. Those 3 might not be possible anymore, but others on that wheel that I have are possible. So flexibility, again, knowing your baseline needs and being okay with not engaging with all of them, but knowing that engaging in a few still matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And if it's not active time with your kids, does that make you a bad mother?
Oh, no. Hear me loud and clear. Because I think, I already said therapy is one of the tools that I use. I go to therapy every week, and it's not remote. It is in person. I work for Innovate, so I work full time. So that therapy is done in the evening when my kids are home. And so that means there are nights where I say, okay, dad's going to get you off the bus. Dad's going to do dinner because mommy's got to go to therapy. Or even exercise now, trying to fit in movement. And if it doesn't happen in the morning, being okay with saying, I'm going to go in the evening, even though that means being away from my kids for a chunk of time. And I'm so passionate about this because it is so hard. It's so hard. The second you get in that car, the guilt is on your shoulder. Like, you're not spending time with them. They're feeling neglected. No, they're not. They're not. And you are taking care of yourself so you can give more of yourself to them. And yes, don't listen to the guilt. You are not a bad mom for taking time away from your kids to take care of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a quality time, right? Or you can give more a quality, which is work too. Like, right. It's everything where it's like spending all of your time on one thing, like the quality diminishes because we as human beings can't do that. Like we have to take steps back. We have to give back to ourselves to refill our buckets to then pour back out in a more high quality way. What were we going to add?
Yeah, sorry, I got really excited. I was like, because this is something that, I'm saying, don't let the guilt bother you. I'm here to tell you, I struggle with it, all the time. I'm not saying that I just let the guilt roll off my shoulders. It is hard. So I have to actively talk to myself. But one thing that has worked, or that is working is I have used that as an opportunity to teach my kids about self-care, because I know, Erin, like me and you, we are millennials, right? We have lived our lives as these high achieving people pleasers. And now we are, on TikTok and social media, you kind of see like the millennial generation has reached this point of like burnout. And now we are embracing self-care. But I get to talk to my kids about that earlier now. They might say, Mommy, they don't know what therapy is. So sometimes I'll say, Mommy's got to go to the doctor. And I'll say, Mommy's got to go to the doctor. And they're like, why do you have to go? Or why are you going to go to yoga? Why are you going to go to, wherever? And instead of immediately letting myself be hit with guilt, I'll say, you know what, this is a way Mommy takes care of her body. And that opens up this door of communication for me to be like, how do you take care of your body? What do you do when you're tired? Oh, you take a nap. What do you do when your, tummy hurts? What do you do? And they're young, but it still opens that door for me to help guide them in taking care of themselves from a younger age, so they don't reach 33 and are like, what in the world is self-care?
Or completely like disregard what their body's saying.
Right.
I think it's something we're not taught to do. And I think our generation for sure, it's like we weren't taught to know what our body was communicating. Mm-hmm. I've learned more on TikTok about my body.
I know.
I've learned like going through school as a dietitian, it's like, it's wild that like we just don't learn so much about our bodies and what things mean. Even something we talk about often with clients is like, are you stressed? Are you hungry? Are you having symptoms or are you hungry? It's like trying to like navigate, what is that signal that I'm hearing? Am I full? Am I bloated? Am I anxious? Like what's going on? And it's so fascinating, but learning how to hear and understand like comes from those communications as a kid, which is so important. Two more questions. So the first one on that same note, because I know that you have these conversations with your kids, how do you talk about your IBS with your kids now that he's old enough to understand, right? He's old enough to understand that you're in the bathroom longer, or like maybe that you need to go and they're just there, like, that it's
I use a stool.
Yeah. So he's old enough to kind of understand that. And so how do you approach that conversation with your kids?
Yeah, I laughed because I do have this conversation with my almost 6-year-old, because they follow you everywhere, right? Like they've been with me in the bathroom for a very long time. They're always there. They want to have a deep, heartfelt conversation. It's going to be when you need to go to the bathroom. So the door for communication's there. And they're very open about asking. So you won't have to be like, hey, let's sit down because Mommy wants to talk to you about her IBS, right? They're probably going to just ask, why why do you have to put your feet on this stool? And I just straight up talk to them. I'll say my tummy works a little bit differently than daddy's tummy or your tummy. And it sometimes doesn't go every day. And I have to really take care of it, like you take care of Maggie, our cat, or something. And so I always bring it back to self-care. And I talk about it in a very like general, this is just how I operate. And that's fine. Everyone else operates a different way. Mommy needs to do this. You don't, and that's okay. I am having the conversation of like, I would like to go to the bathroom by myself. I do need that alone time for it to be successful. So if you could just shut the door, everything would be a lot better. But it's kind of fun to talk about it with them because kids, they like to talk about poop and going to the bathroom and all the things that are not necessarily quote unquote appropriate to talk about. They talk about it all the time. So I just come to it with a compassionate.
Yeah,
this is what it is.
And it's so important. I mean, you and I both, we were diagnosed with IBS as kids, and I very clearly remember the embarrassment and shame I felt because it's like, I am in pain, or like, for me, I dealt with constipation as a kid. So it's like manual manipulation, like trying to dig poop out and like the things that like you would never want to tell your parents. It's like embarrassing. But if I would have heard my parents talking about their poop lives, like maybe I would have felt more okay saying, hey, that's not happening for me. Or like, I'm struggling. It's like, I didn't know what wasn't normal until I'm in, pain and being rushed to the hospital. And so it's like, you don't understand. And then there's even more shame put on you because it's like, well, is this just me? Or like, what's happening? And then you don't know how to approach it with other kids. And I think it's so important to have those conversations. Now, then you have to deal with, I'm sure your son might out you or like talk about you.
Oh,
so
for sure. Yeah.
Like, that self-compassion that you mentioned, as well as like confidence in yourself. And I hear we hear moms, I don't know if you've heard this from some of your clients, but the whole like, well, I can't be gone from the house too long. So then my kids have to miss out, or we have to cancel plans and they don't understand. And that's like a different level of guilt that is heartbreaking because, you can, firsthand, and I only know just from their stories, like they want to make their kids happy. They want to have that time. And so sometimes you do have to communicate that like, there are limits that you have. And, that is so difficult. Have you ever had to do that? Like cancel plans because of symptoms, or have you dealt with that just with conversations with other moms that you've worked with? Yeah.
So I, not specifically based on my IBS symptoms. This is another topic we can hit another day, but I have had to cancel things related to mental health symptoms, depression and anxiety, which they're like the buddy system with IBS. And you're right, there is this added level of guilt that comes because you feel like you're causing them to miss out on life. And what I try to do for myself, and what I would encourage listeners and people who struggle with that to do is to, one, try and give yourself some grace if you can't have someone speak some love to you, but also know that you're showing them in that moment, you're being vulnerable and saying, mommy has a limitation, right? And that can be something that's, again, embraced and honored as something that's okay to have. Or it can be something that is fought against. And because I think it's so important to just come to it from this point of acceptance and like, this is a limitation that I have, because you never know what our kids are going to face and what limits they are going to develop as adolescents and adults themselves. And so if they have tangible experiences and memories that they can look back on and say, oh, my mom had a limitation And it's totally fine. If they grow up with this knowledge that it's okay and you care for yourself in those moments, they will do that for themselves. So you're not doing them a disservice, although it does feel like it in the moment. But if we think big picture, you're equipping them with the ability to accept their own limitations that they will inevitably have when they're adults.
Yeah. And empathy, right? Empathy and understanding that they may not have at first. I'm sure it's not at first of like, I was going to the park and now I'm not, or we were going to do this and now we're not. And like, kids, they're developing and like, you can't take anything personal. And I've even learned that just from interacting with kids. I can only imagine what that's like having someone that is in your life at all times. Cause like, they're going to embarrass you. They're going to say things that are so hurtful that break.
That's not fair. You're
but they don't know. I mean, but they have to learn, because if what they do know is like, if I'm mean, I get what I want, that's not a good thing. And like, I think we think sometimes like out on the outside, we're like, oh, we would never do that. But then if you're in it, it's like, well, you love this child, you want them to feel happy. And like, we hear it from moms so often where they're like, trying to push through, but then they have an accident. And like, then they have to, and it's like, that's something that's like, taking care of yourself is so important. And it's good to remember that like, taking care of yourself isn't always going to look like what you want it to look like. And it's not always going to give you everything. And that's a really difficult thing, but it's a positive when you're sharing life with others, because you're teaching them empathy, you're teaching them understanding, and you're also learning yourself of like, where are my limits? What can I do? What am I not going to do well? Or like, what am I capable of? There's probably some fear we have to overcome too, of like, some moms may need to actually get out and do the thing, and like, that's big. We see that a lot with our clients, right? Of getting in the car and going for the drive, going on the trip, like taking those small steps. And that's what you do alongside the help of a support, which is what we are to our clients, or, your therapist can be, or your doctor, whoever, in your life could be. But it looks different for each person. And so it's okay to be different. It's okay to have a different outcome, a different story. And it's also okay to kind of experiment and play and try new things on, and invite your kids into that, which I've seen you do. So I wanted you to talk on that, because I know that that's something you care about, because it is so important. And I always try to remember, like, as we're preparing for even the thought of potentially having a child one day, not anytime soon, we take
thinking about having a child.
Which I think is also good, right? That's something I feel like millennials have done with like motherhood and parenthood is such a different topic than it was for the generation before us, where it's like, there's nothing wrong with being a parent right away. Like, a young parent, there's nothing wrong with being a single parent right now. There's nothing wrong with like being a parent later in life. There's nothing wrong with not being a parent, or
deciding that's not what you want.
An unconventional parent where like you adopt versus have, a biological child. Like there's no wrong way to be a parent, and it's okay to wait. And if you have IBS, like it's okay to want to figure out your symptoms beforehand. Like that's not a wrong thing. Yes, it might change and like it might differ, but like it's okay to be prepared. It's okay to, do the work. I think what you mentioned with like your mental health and like your emotional health, like it's probably a good thing to do that beforehand. It's also fine to do it later. It's like your kids are going to figure it out with you. Like it's fine. But there's no wrong way of doing it. And with IBS, like, yes, there are more barriers, but it's not impossible to be a great mom or, a great dad, or to have really incredible kids that experience life fully. And, there's also like, there's so many ways we could go with this of like, yes, there could be a potential genetic component, like, and I say, like, I don't want my child to have gut issues. And I kind of feel that way as someone who had them as a kid. It's like, how do I make sure my child's gut microbiome is the best possible? It's like, I'm going to go in with like my best gut microbiome. And that's okay too. But also if you didn't do it, or like, let's say you don't breastfeed, and like, we know breastfeeding does help with the gut microbiome. Like we know vaginal delivery helps with the gut microbiome, but that doesn't mean that if you need a C-section or if you choose to formula feed because there's these other buckets that need more from you, or like there's other priorities that you need to be present, like that's okay. Like there are other ways of going about it, like, increasing fiber diversity young. If your child's picky, finding ways to do that. Like there's so many different ways of like raising a human being. And we can prepare. It might not go the way that we prepare, but the flexibility, the compassion, the kind of going with it and doing your best and being okay with what that looks like is so valuable. So
letting that be enough. Let that be enough.
Yeah.
Not feel less than because.
Yeah. And on that, I think because we're having this conversation and people might be like, yeah, Lindsey's right. Like, that's exactly what I should do. But you may turn to your Facebook group or your mom meetup, and they may not be saying the same thing. And I think with anything with IBS, if there are people speaking into you that are changing the way you think in a way that's not serving to you, it is okay to cut them off. And it is okay to find better friends. And yes, you might lose some of that support, but is it really support? I don't know if you had to deal with that, if you want to leave us on that as we kind of close out our conversation.
Yeah. So some advice that I give to soon to be parents or whatever is try and develop and be confident in your mom voice. And I don't mean the mom voice you use when you are yelling or snapping at your children. The mom voice of, this is what I've chosen. This is the way that this is my choice in this scenario. And I'm confident in that. And I say that as your mom voice, because you're going to be faced with so many different choices. And you're right. In every Facebook group, Instagram post, there's going to be another mom that's making a different choice that's telling you her choice is better. And you are going to have conversations where you have different perspectives. And so develop your mom voice, be confident in the choices that you're making. For your body, for your family, that will allow you to be in community with other people, but not feel less than. You can be confident in your choice. Mom number 2 can be confident in her choice, and they can be different choices. And you can coincide and coexist and do life together. But just be confident in the choices that you're making. I totally agree with you. If there are mothers or women or whoever that are speaking negatively or speaking in a condescending way, that makes you feel less than, that makes you feel like you can't have your own independent choice in the matter, those are probably not friendships or relationships that will serve you. And it's okay to put a boundary around that and look for those that do serve you.
Absolutely. And it's okay for your kids to know that too, because they need to learn too, right? It's okay for that to be with your IBS, like we talk about with health. We may give you a recommendation or a way that, we say go about doing things. It may not look like that for you, and that's okay. You have autonomy in your own life. And I don't think that means that we have to oh, well, I'm the best and everyone else needs to leave and I'm not going to listen. I think there's a way to be confident, have your own autonomy, but also be open to hearing what people have to say and having good conversations, because you might learn something that you're you know what, I may want to adapt that into my life in a different way.
Right.
But trying it on for yourself is so important, not being guilted or shamed, which is just big. And easier said than done. So it's also
yes.
As everything in life, be flexible, have compassion, but also know that if you struggle with any and all of it, it's okay to struggle. Everyone's
you're in good company. You're in good company.
That is what's normal.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lindsey, for coming on. And Lindsey is on our team. It's me and Lindsey at Innovate. And so if you are interested in working with Lindsey, if you're you know what, I'm navigating motherhood with IBS and also this disordered eating history, and I don't know what to do, we can definitely help. So there is a link for our consult call if you want to talk, or you can just reach out to us through Instagram to chat, and happy to see if that would be a good fit or point you in the right direction. But Lindsey, thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much. This has been the best part of my day. So do a consult call if you'd want to work with me, because I'd be happy to talk with any of you. But thank you so much.